in a small, remote village, buried deep within the northern forests, lived Marcus Halloway, a name that, when spoken, made the villagers' faces change, silence fall, and the air grow heavy, as if even the wind itself stopped moving. Marcus had never been a monster in appearance. On the contrary, he was the quiet handyman you'd call to fix a faulty chimney or service the heating before winter set in. But behind those shy features lay layers of anger and resentment, built up over years until they became fuel for someone else entirely. Someone who smiled to your face while plotting behind your back. His childhood wasn't just about poverty, a violent father, and a silent mother. The spark that ignited his deep hatred toward women came during his teenage years. There was a girl at school named Ellen, 2 years older than him. She would crush him with her words in front of classmates, mocking his clothes, his voice, every attempt he made to connect with anyone. One day, she forced him to read a paragraph aloud to the class, his voice trembling, and burst out laughing when he stumbled. So much so that even the teacher didn't intervene. That moment never left him. In his mind, her face merged with that of his silent mother, and with the laughter of every woman who had ever belittled him. From that day on, he began to see independent, defiant women as symbols of the humiliation he could never forgive. Years passed. Marcus learned the trade of maintenance and heating repair, moving from house to house, observing the smallest details: a weak latch on a back door, a neglected chimney, a smoke alarm in need of a new battery. No one ever suspected him. He was just Marcus the handyman, the man who fixed what others could not. But one winter night changed everything. Snow was falling heavily as Marcus walked with steady steps toward a house at the end of the road. An old wooden home occupied by Margaret Holmes, a lonely widow. She knew him, trusted him in fact. Just 2 days earlier, he had come to check her heating system. During that visit, he moved quickly, removed the battery from the carbon monoxide detector, and made sure the chimney was partially clogged with soot. There was nothing to suggest danger, except in his mind. That night, he slipped into the house quietly through the back door. He left no trace, no broken locks, no mess. He made his way to the basement, adjusted the air valve on the furnace, and left the door ajar so the deadly gases could rise. Then he stepped outside and returned to his usual spot among the trees, watching through a side window as the lamp's light slowly dimmed. By 11 o'clock, there was no movement at all. In the morning, people gathered at Margaret's house. An ambulance, police officers, a neighbor crying as she explained how she thought it was just a chimney problem. Everyone saw it as an accident, a tragic accident. Everyone except Marcus. For him, it was pure success. No blood, no screams, just a life that stopped because he decided it should. That night, he wrote in a small notebook he kept hidden under his bed, M1. She fell asleep quickly. The house helped. The fault was in the battery, not in me. That feeling, a blend of calm and control, became an addiction. Fixing houses was no longer enough. He began searching for sick houses, for victims whose deaths he could hide under the guise of fate or accident. And so Marcus began his journey. One after another, each crime a new lesson, and each lesson a step deeper into a darkness from which there was no way back. After Margaret, something strange awakened inside Marcus. It wasn't just about a planned accident that had succeeded. It felt like a door had opened, and behind it was a world only visible to those who craved silent control. The night became his training ground, the cold his weapon, and Holmes. psychological maps he walked through with growing confidence. In the weeks that followed, he contented himself with manipulating things from afar, removing a smoke detector's battery during a maintenance visit, turning a heating knob up a notch, pulling a curtain back by a single centimeter. But that wasn't enough anymore. He needed to be there when the final shift happened. Not to see blood or hear screams, but to feel that raw sensation. The moment a place loses its certainty and life dangles by a thin thread in his hands. He chose a house on the far edge of Holloway Creek. Its owner, Hannah Bradshaw, a new music teacher, lived alone, the faint sound of piano drifting from her window at sunset. On one stormy night, when most of the houses had lost power, hers remained lit by a small battery lamp near the front door. Marcus slipped in through the back door he'd tested before. He stood in the hallway for a moment, attuning himself to the rhythm of the house. Footsteps on creaky wood, steady breathing from the bedroom, and slow drops of water falling from a tired faucet. He didn't touch her, didn't even get close. He simply opened the water valve just above the limit and left a damp towel beneath an old heater he knew had weak electrical protection. Then he sat for 10 minutes on the staircase leading upstairs, listening to her breathing, imagining how the next morning would unravel into confusion and fear, how the neighbors would gather, and how Hannah would learn a lesson she'd never forget. You were never as safe as you thought. When the electrical short ignited in the basement after dawn, Marcus was already far away, watching faint smoke drift from the vent and writing in his notebook. Fear breathed silence. That closeness, being there, hearing, seeing, intoxicated him. Each time he pushed himself one step further. He entered Emily Carter's house at night while she slept, set the wall clock 5 minutes ahead, turned the stove flame down to its lowest, then shut off the vent fan. In the morning, when she lit the coffee pot, the kitchen sighed with a small explosion that shattered glass and disrupted her day. No one was hurt, but Marcus walked out of the woods that day feeling he had painted the scene exactly as he wanted, leaving behind only a trace that only he could see. A clock sped forward, a curtain held by an invisible finger. With every crossing of that line, he discovered a new flavor to the feeling. The first time he saw the lights fade slowly, it was serenity. The first time he sat listening to a victim's breathing from inside the house, it was ecstasy. The first time he experienced a calculated explosion while standing on the threshold, it was a high born from the power to write the scene's outcome in a single, invisible sentence. And each new sensation demanded a greater one afterward, as though the darkness, which had once felt endless, now demanded a higher toll with every night. But darkness never lasts without cracks. His little signature, a clock set 5 minutes ahead, a picture frame tilted just slightly, a blank sheet quietly planted inside a book, began to shift from a private ritual into a thread linking houses that didn't know one another. The first to notice wasn't the police, but an elderly woman who owned a small hardware store in the village center. She whispered to Detective Anna Fletcher, who had come from the county division after a string of incidents, that something unnatural was repeating. Smoke alarm batteries missing in homes visited by the same maintenance man, and wall clocks that hurried time, as though one hand was toying with them. Anna wasn't looking for a supernatural monster. She was looking for a pattern. She opened the records of the only company serving the area, compared service calls to incident addresses. The chimney that suffocated Margaret, the basement short at Hannah's, the small kitchen blast at Emily's. One name had passed through all three homes in the preceding months: Marcus Lear. It wasn't proof, but she felt the village beginning to give voice to a fear it had swallowed. All the lines led back to the man who fixed things. While Anna was gathering her threads, Marcus was stepping up to his next level: direct action. It was no longer enough to set the mechanisms in motion and leave. On another stormy night, he chose a wooden house belonging to a small family often away from home. The husband worked night shifts. The wife, Rose, slept at exactly 11. He entered, as always, through the back door, then stood at the bedroom threshold. This time, he broke his old rule. He approached. He reached out, placed a pillow against the edge of her face, not to smother. He didn't want to see death as it happened, but to feel the ending at a distance that let him be the final seal in this silent system. He withdrew before she was aware, left the pillow in a way that would raise no suspicion, slipped out slowly, and closed the door behind him. That was the first time he touched the point of no return. And in the morning, when word came that Rose hadn't woken up on time, and the doctor wrote sudden heart failure for a woman not yet 40, Marcus sat on the edge of his bed for a long time. He didn't smile. He didn't take notes. He simply understood that he was no longer an observer creating accidents. He was now the actor, pulling the thread with his own hand. And from here, the mistakes began. The first mistake was in the snow. On his way to Rose's house, the sole of his shoe caught on a small rock by the fence, tearing a piece of rubber from the right heel. He didn't notice. But Anna, visiting the scene a week later to reconstruct what could be reconstructed, saw an incomplete shoe print at the edge of the yard, repeated 5 times along the back fence. It wasn't the homeowner's print. His shoes were different, nor the doctor's or a policeman's. It was a strange, incomplete print. That led her to the town shops. No one had sold that model in 2 years, except one store, which had sold a pair in that size to a quiet man who didn't say much: Marcus. The second mistake was his signature. In Rose's house, Anna also found a picture frame tilted by exactly 1 degree, unlike the naturally straight frames she saw in most homes. In Hannah's house before that, the wall clock was 5 minutes fast. In Margaret's case file, the gas detector was missing its battery. Small things, but when collected in a mind trained to notice, they became a map. The third mistake was his silent arrogance. He thought the police wouldn't connect distant homes in a small village whose people disliked admitting fear. But Anna wasn't from the village. She hadn't been raised to keep silent. She began sketching a network: service visits, recurring breakdowns in certain homes, the timing of storms. And with every line she drew, Marcus's name appeared in the background like a slowly spreading ink blot. Then came the night of the great blackout. An ice storm cut power to most of Holloway Creek, and the townspeople gathered in a temporary shelter at the church. One house alone kept its window closed over the flicker of a cautious candle. A house Anna had prepared herself, with hidden battery-powered cameras disconnected from any network, and motion sensors that made no sound. She told no one. She made no obvious trap. She simply left an easy house marked on the map of the night. Marcus came late, knowing storms forgave accidents. He opened the back door with a movement so practiced it had become muscle memory. He entered the hallway, paused to listen. No one. He crossed the corridor step by step, past a picture frame on the wall, and couldn't stop himself from touching it. The frame tilted 1 degree. Then he lifted his eyes to a clock at the end of the hall and pushed the hand forward 5 minutes. Those little touches that had belonged only to him his way of saying I was here, were this time seen by a fourth eye. He didn't hear the sensor's faint click. He didn't see the tiny red light that went dark for a moment before returning. All he felt was the calm he loved, as the corridors of the house seemed to open before him. He stepped toward the bedroom, opened the door. On the bed was a neatly arranged blanket shaped like a sleeping figure, just a blanket stuffed over a pillow. Only one moment was needed for Anna to step from the shadows to his left and say, "Marcus." He didn't shout. He didn't move. He simply looked at the tilted frame on the wall, then at the clock pushing time forward, as though seeing his signature turn suddenly into evidence. When he tried to step back, he bumped into two other shadows in the hallway. It wasn't a noisy arrest. It was as quiet as his nights, but it ended with hands fastening his own. In a small, abandoned flat at the edge of town, Anna later opened a wooden box found under his bed. Old notebooks, maps of houses, red ink lines marking storm times, and abbreviated names M-1, H-2, E-3. Each page proof that nothing had been left to chance, and that his pride in organizing chaos was the very thing that tied the evidence together. In court, he didn't speak much. He never admitted to killing anyone. He only said one sentence, looking down at the floor. "I only arrange things." But Holloway Creek, the village that had been used to swallowing its fear, was never the same. People began checking their clocks every evening, testing their smoke alarm batteries before bed, straightening picture frames if they leaned even 1 degree, not out of fear of some supernatural terror, but of an ordinary man who had decided to rearrange the world in his own way. And when the old folks speak of that winter, they'll tell you the wind was harsh, the snow heavy, and one name still echoes in the corridors: Marcus Lear, the man who thought darkness would always be his ally, until the small details he thought invisible brought him into the light.